This is my second conversation with Mike, so if you haven't seen the first conversation, I recommend starting there and there will be a link in the description. Mike and I were both keen to continue our conversation, which is always encouraging, but I'm not sure that we made much more progress despite our enthusiasm. The principal issue seems to be that we both define and treat the ideas of natural and supernatural differently. Mike seems to treat these ideas as descriptive of distinct domains, about which we may or may not have knowledge. I feel that these are descriptions of knowledge, the knowledge that we have. As we learn more and more, the idea of what is considered to be natural will expand. If we were to know all the things that there are to know about our reality, then what is natural would map perfectly onto reality. This definition seems to be a challenge to Mike, who I can't help feel is making a philosophical God of the Gaps argument. At one point in this video, in an attempt to understand how our views differed, I invited Mike to take a survey used by the Street Epistemology community, the results of which were slightly surprising. If you're interested in the survey itself, there will be a link in the description. As a matter of housekeeping, this video is very late, as I have had a lot of demands on my time recently. However, I have done some work to make producing these videos much faster in the future and hopefully reduce future delays. A final note, the audio in this interview suffered a lot due to some disruptive background noise at the time of recording. I have done my best to clean it up, however the audio is not as clean as I would have liked, so my apologies for that. All that said, I hope you will enjoy my second conversation with Mike, and keep an eye out for our third conversation, which has already been recorded and will be released soon after this. Hello, Mike.
Hey, well,
How are you?
good. Hey, can you hear me okay? I decided to use my headphones. Is it good?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. No problem. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're good. Thank you.
Awesome. So just as before I just started the recording, before I added you to the C, I hope that's
Yeah.
okay. Awesome. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
So how did you feel about the video after it had been polished up?
It looks good.
Put out into
Yeah, it
the
looks
world?
good. You're really good at it. I don't have the patience to do all the post-production stuff. So I usually just do stuff and
Yeah.
put it out there.
I'm not sure if it's patience or just obsession with unnecessary details, but in any case, thank you. So cool. I'm quite interested to see where we go today. So as I understand it, we've got about an hour, give or take, and we'll see.
I'm open to however long it takes. Yeah.
Awesome. I tend to feel like there's a sense that enthusiasm will carry us beyond a point where it's actually probably sensible to continue to talk.
Listeners, yeah.
Well, I'm not so much concerned about that. I know in myself that I can sometimes want to talk something through with somebody beyond the point where it's actually having utility. And it's just having a stopping point, stepping away and coming back to the conversation, and that decompression time I think can be really useful. So yeah, but yeah, now it sounds good. We certainly didn't have any problems on the last video. So I was thinking about how to start, and I had a couple of thoughts, but I think perhaps maybe a good place to start might be to steel man each other's positions, or how we feel about each other's positions. Would that be acceptable to you? Are you familiar with the steel manning concept?
I haven't heard that phrase before, but I can understand what you're saying. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Awesome. Yeah. So if anybody hasn't heard of this, steel manning is basically the opposite of straw manning. So straw manning would be to offer the least charitable version of your interlocutor's points and positions so that you can then tear it down with great ease and low effort. Steel manning is essentially the opposite of that, which is attempting to do your best to present the best form of your interlocutor's argument such that you can make sure that you both understand it, and therefore when you're talking you're not you can be confident you're not trying to attack a straw man. So if I was to try to steel man the position I think you were taking, both at the end of our previous video and also in your video replies, which I've linked to the previous videos, your position, I think, is that, well, I think we agreed on a lot of things, and I think we did agree that certainty was not a move that we would want to make. I think that the important difference is come where we are assessing the relative value of supernatural claims as hypotheses for hypothetical explanations for things that could be occurring, and that that your view would be that that I would be too dismissive of supernatural claims almost a priori, and that was perhaps then leading me to not take them seriously or consider their possible impact. Is that
yeah? So I wouldn't even put a value judgment on it. I would just say that if we set things up as either this or that, and we start the conversation by saying that this one is more likely, I just want to understand why you think it's more likely. So in other words, I can't just take it for granted that it's more likely without an explanation.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. So do you think that may well just serve as a précis for both our positions? But if you have a view on my position, or you feel like you want to steelman my position, go ahead, and we can go from there.
So I think I did more of the talking in terms of outlining a position last time than you did. But just by the way you reacted to what I was saying, I could kind of get a sense of where you're coming from. And it's possible that I can superimpose the perspective of other atheists I've talked to in the past on top of where you're at, and I might be wrong. But I mean, the one thing I could say is that it seems, based on that analogy shift, that you view these two hypotheses as intrinsically different in terms of probability. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I guess if I went through it again, I might find a few other things, but that's kind of what stood out to me.
No, that's fair enough. And by the way, I think that's a really good thing to call out. There is a tendency to not be speaking to the person that you're speaking to, but be addressing the echoes and ghosts of past conversations and talking points. So yeah, no problem at all. Okay, so I think one of the things I'd like to do, and perhaps should have done more clearly in the previous video, is to get your definition of supernatural. What do you mean by supernatural? And I guess by extension, then how would you define natural?
Yeah, very good. So that's one of the issues, and it's not just an issue we're having. I mean, I've followed probably thousands of similar conversations, and that's always an issue because it's not a clearly defined line. But at the same time, if you talk to most scientists that come at things from a naturalistic perspective, they have a mental picture of how they think reality works. So they have, this idea that, there's some kind of beginning point, and there's certain circumstances that caused everything else to happen. And it's all natural in the sense that there's some kind of mechanistic process all the way through that can be logically figured out, or at least we can try to figure it out. So then if that's our definition of the natural, then whatever is beyond that would automatically be the negation of that, would be the supernatural. Or we could find a different term, because supernatural is kind of it has so many other implications, or it's been used in so many ways that it's kind of a term that might not be useful. So we might come up with something else, like maybe non-natural, or I don't know what other expression it could be. It's up to you if you think we need to change it. But I gave that analogy as one example of how something could be natural and supernatural at the same time. The analogy with that virtual reality. So like you create, say, the Minecraft world, because my kid has just discovered Minecraft and he's spending hours and hours on that. There's a world within this virtual environment where they're building stuff and they're, having some kind of, interaction with other people. But there's a clear distinction between that world and the outside world, or the computer that makes that world possible, even though it's all natural from beginning to end from our perspective. But if somebody was somehow, if some character in Minecraft can achieve consciousness, to them that would be the natural, and everything else would be supernatural. So that's one way to kind of illustrate a possible boundary there. But yeah, go ahead. Tell me what you think of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. So I think that the concept of natural, when we talk about natural, we're really talking about the present state of the grand model of our understanding. Like it's the limits of what we understand to be the case. And that will include things that we have explanations for and things that we do not have explanations for. So phenomenon that we have observed, but we do not understand. The classic example here, quantum physics, is just weird every which way. But we cannot deny that we're seeing this. So so quantum physics has become part of nature because we've observed it, and it's become something that we've had to think about and account for. Even though we don't yet have sufficient models yet to properly understand all of it. But so the natural would be all of the things we both have a mental model to understand, or at least have observed sufficient that we need to find explanations for it. Therefore, the supernatural would include everything else that we have not yet even observed or come into contact with, and therefore certainly don't have models to explain. Now, there are some things for which we may build models that may make predictions about what we might discover in the world. So you might be able to say that we can use models to explore things that we have not yet discovered. The Higgs boson was a great example. There was the theory of that Higgs boson could explain the sort of texture of space, and the Higgs boson was hypothesized as part of that. We looked for it. We think we've now discovered it. Interesting and exciting stuff. So there is a space by which our models can extend beyond our current observations and make predictions. And then there's a space by which we can observe things that our models don't account for, but we need to square them. All of that, I would say, would be what we would consider to be natural. And I think it's certainly true that there is a supernatural, as in there are things that we have not yet discovered that our models are not even beginning to describe that may exist somewhere. That we may discover tomorrow or next week. The idea that we've finished, that our model is fully inclusive, is clearly silly. And so there are certainly things that are currently supernatural. My assertion would be the moment we discovered a reason to believe that they exist, they would immediately become natural, because we would then build them either into our models or we'd need to account for them in our models. And so basically, you could suggest that the natural is everything that we have a justifiable reason to believe exists. And that's not to say that that is final or complete as a picture, but just what we presently can justify.
Yeah, so I think I agree in part with that definition, but I also see challenges there, because if we step back, say 200-300 years in history, things that today we understand at that point, by that definition would have been classified as supernatural, and that's not what I'm talking about. Because if we just did it that way, it's just a never-ending goalpost, never ever moving goalpost, and it's very hard to even have a conversation on it. The way I think of it is reality could just be natural from beginning to end, the way many people do imagine it. Or it could be a subset of something bigger, like its own mechanism. I don't know, so I could sit there and develop and build a device, and that device has its own rules by how it functions and it does its thing. But it's not all of reality. It's just something that exists within a wider reality. So I'm not even sure I know how to explain it, but I think the debate is really as to whether, let's say we went into the future several thousand years and we studied the universe from beginning to end, and we understood every aspect of it, and we understood how its mechanisms work and why everything happens. And then the question is this all that there is, or is there something beyond this that is of a totally different nature, or something else that it's not necessarily illogical, but it's different. It's some other kind of reality. So,
yeah, I would agree. Well, let me agree that the concept of what is natural is a goalpost that shifts, right? Every time we learn something new, we build it into our current understanding of the universe, and so whatever reality is, and by any extension, is natural to the extent that it is what it is, right? science and the laws of nature and the principles of our human endeavor to try to understand the universe is essentially trying to map reality. And so ultimately its ability to be effective in building an accurate map will improve over time. But eventually, perfect science would be a perfect map of reality in some way. Therefore, all of whatever is reality, whatever that is, would become natural by definition, right? Because eventually it would theoretically match the map.
Yeah. So that's why I was trying to use that what is this? The simulated reality analogy, because it kind of describes how things can be natural, and there's this sort of universal map, like you're saying, but there's also a boundary between the world within the virtual reality and the world outside. So, I mean, like, let's say the naturalist is correct. Like, reality is purely natural from beginning to end. We get to the point where we understand how everything works, we understand all the laws of physics, everything about reality, and we get advanced enough in our technology to replicate that whole thing within a virtual environment. So, there's certain fundamental constants, like gravity and electromagnetism and things like that. And there's molecules and they form compounds and they develop all the way up to rational entities that reason not because of the computer that is underneath, but because of the molecules based on which they're built, just like our brains, So we could, logically speaking, we could replicate that reality. But from an individual existing within that reality, what they see as natural is their universe and their own laws and their own things, while we could sit outside and see the whole thing as natural because it's really part of our reality. I mean, we built it. So it's natural. It's not supernatural to us, but for them, our reality is like a whole different type of reality. So it's an extension, but there's a clear boundary between us and them. So, I mean, obviously the analogy has its limits, but I think that's what usually people think of when they think of the supernatural, and not necessarily just the same kind of thing that we've had, for the past 1,000 years. Every few years we learn more about reality, and then what we used to think is supernatural becomes natural, but it was actually natural all along. We just didn't know. We just didn't understand it.
I'm not sure I quite follow that. Well, let me agree. Simulation theory has been around for a while, and there's actually, an argument to be made that we're more likely to be in a simulated universe than a non-simulated universe. And the argument goes something like, are you familiar with the map is not the territory mental model? The idea that the map is not the territory. The idea that a perfect map of reality would be reality itself, right? Yeah. If your map is identical to the thing that it's describing, it becomes the thing it's describing, right? Because they are identical. And the argument goes that if you really want to do experiments with reality and understand reality better, then you would want to do something like simulate an entirely independent reality and start looking at it, right? And so theoretically, a futuristic alien species that's able to do something like this would be sufficiently powerful enough to spin up multiple, realities and watch how they grow and form, and we could therefore just be part of that many multiple reality experiment in running on this alien supercomputer. And the theory goes then that given that there are there would therefore be more simulated universes than the singular actual universe, it becomes therefore more likely that we're in a simulated universe, which is interesting in and of itself. But the component about which we, in the middle of this space, are trying to understand outwards towards understanding, to essentially getting to the position where we can hypothesize these aliens in this machine and how it might work, is all natural, even though it's in a computer,
Yeah.
right? We are learning the laws that the computer are exposing to us. We're learning how things seem to work and behave within this system. Yeah. And if this system then gets discovered to be actually just a simulation within a wider system, that will just form part of the model, right? The model just extends into that space as well. There is nothing that would not be considered natural once we understood it and we had a model for it. That would be just the way it was.
So you're kind of saying what I'm saying, in the sense that, yes, there's this continuous line between the simulation and the preceding reality, and yet there's also a boundary because of the way we access our knowledge, in the sense that, like, we study the world through our senses, and our senses are able to perceive our reality. Like we touch things, we see things, we see the light reflected on objects within our reality. We don't see the software underneath the reality with our senses. The equipment we devise, like a microscope, wouldn't go down to the software level. It would just go down to the lower level within our same sphere, and so on. So it isn't clear how exactly we would access that behind the scenes stuff through our mechanisms for learning, for finding things out about our universe. So
I would agree. It's certainly that would be a difficult problem, but by virtue of it not being clear, we don't yet, maybe we can get to software code bedrock in our in our theoretical simulated universe. We just don't know. So that would definitely be sitting in a category of things that the moment we notice something where the answer that seems to best fit those circumstances is that we're in a simulated universe, that will become a more viable candidate proposition, right? But until we discover something that necessitates that as an answer, it's not important to us that we brought it in as an initial hypothesis. We can just have that on the back burner and notice it if we ever discover things that make it more relevant.
So in that sense, we can, even if we bring in the idea of the supernatural could be something that it's similar to that, in the sense that maybe it's not exactly like an alien race that designed the world, but it could still be something rational that exists through its own mechanisms, and there's a reason based on how it exists, and then it's responsible for this particular reality that we're in, or whatever.
Sure. I mean, Descartes' demon, could be one answer, or it could be we're living in the Matrix. In either case, we couldn't know, and therefore, fine. Hypotheses, put them on the back burner. No need to jump in on making a decision at this point, right? It's if we come up with some reason to suspect that we're actually being deceived by a demon, that then by the evidence of the thing that's making us think that we need to address that, we would justify that claim. Similarly, the argument that we're a brain in a vat or living in the Matrix in some way, it's all only necessary once we come up with something that we need that to explain what we're observing.
So basically, what you're really saying is kind of an Occam razor's approach to the question. So we're not really. There's no real reason to consider that possibility until we run into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, because I'm to be clear, I don't think you're misunderstanding that, but just some people seem to with Occam's razor, is that Occam's razor doesn't speak about what is true. It doesn't tell you what is certainly true. It just tells you what is more reasonable to believe. Would you disagree with Occam's razor?
No, but at least from my point of view, and I could misunderstand it, but I see Occam's razor more as a practical tool in our reasoning process. So I could apply it to many situations. Like, for example, let's say there's a community, like a primitive community that lives on an island, on a secluded island that has never been able to swim out or to take a boat out to sea far enough to figure out if there's any other piece of land out there or any other civilization. So as far as they know, they're the only thing that exists. They're the only human beings on the planet because they've never seen anything else, So from a practical perspective, if in their entire recorded history, that's all they know, like their island, their people, that this is all we know and we've never seen anything else, there's no real point in worrying about the possibility of other people existing somewhere else out there, because it doesn't really affect their daily lives. They could just focus on whatever they need to do to survive. So it's kind of a practical thing, but in terms of a probability, like if they sat there and asked the question, like, are we the only people on this planet, or can there be, assuming, obviously they're not going to realize that they're on a planet. They probably have no idea what the world looks like. But they could sit there and be like, well, we don't know if we're the only ones. Maybe there's another island somewhere else with more people. Maybe there isn't. We have no way of knowing. But from a practical standpoint, there's no reason to worry about it because we've never interacted with anybody else. So we don't. There's no point in basically not doing what we need to do to live our lives here, because we're worried that somebody from somewhere else might come over and interact with us in some way. So I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but
well, yeah. One way I've used this example before is, if I leave my office and come back and I find a sandwich on my desk, right? There are multiple theoretical explanations for this, right? One could be the flights of angels have conspired to make me a sandwich and have brought it down from heaven and placed it on my desk. I certainly could not in that moment disprove that hypothesis. There's nothing about it that makes me able to say that it didn't explain the emergence of the phenomenon of this sandwich, but it seems massively more likely to me that my wife has just been kind enough to make me a sandwich and leave it on my desk. And that's because that's something I've observed my wife to do in the past. It seems that something that it's possible for her to do that. And the flights of winged angels is a completely a phenomenon I have absolutely no reason to assume exists. So the number of assumptions I would have to make in order to believe in the moment that it was the winged angels that brought the sandwich are exponentially larger than the number of assumptions I would need to make that my wife has been kind enough to make me the sandwich. And so Occam's razor therefore suggests that I would be better off assuming that it was my wife rather than the angels. And not least of all because the angels, there is equal valid weight to an army of demons, a ghost from another world, a number of theoretical, you could imagine scenarios. Your imagination can just go crazy with that and come up with all kinds of, maybe miraculously the universe's molecular structure just changed slightly such that there was an emergent ex nihilo sandwich generated. It's totally possible, but it seems incredibly unlikely, and I think it's more reasonable to assert the wife hypothesis in this scenario.
Yeah. Again, like we were doing last time, I mean, it seems like we can come up with analogies to reflect the probabilities that we inherently believe.
But could you? I heard you mention that. So, what would I be wrong in this assumption in your worldview? Would I be wrong to dismiss the supernatural explanation for the emergence of the sandwich?
Well, what I'm saying is that the analogy is structured in such a way that two things that are like they don't have an equal probability are being contrasted. So whether it's an angel, whether it's a ghost, whether it's things come into existence ex nihilo, those are inherently improbable things. So when you contrast those things, then yeah, it's obviously not going to work. But like I was trying to say in the video, in my commentary, what we're talking about is reality as a whole and an explanation for why it exists and how it came to exist. So the question is simply, is there an explanation for all of this that is natural from beginning to end? In other words, the natural reality can explain its own existence. And there's kind of a bootstrapping element here. Like you're kind of, at least it appears that way. So I'm not sure how we would argue or discuss that point, but it almost seems like reality has to kind of pick itself up by its own bootstraps. I don't want to sound like I'm promoting like a prime mover argument, but I'm kind of like in between the prime mover argument and this idea that everything can just develop on its own, to where I'm not sure why one would be more plausible than the other. So
by naturalist, we mean everything that we currently know or have a model that's predicting something that we've yet found, but we suspect might be present. As I understand it, we don't currently have a naturalistic explanation for the origin of the universe, although there are models that are exploring different possibilities, and we're getting closer to understanding things in that space. And I think that by that definition, however, because we don't yet know, the answer is that there is no current naturalistic explanation for the origins of the universe. I would say that the answer, therefore, is that we don't yet know. And I guess the question, that would be my answer. And I guess the question then would be, why would you wish to assume a different answer to that question?
Well, okay, so what does we don't yet know mean? Does it mean we don't yet know how it happened, but we do know that it happened naturally? Or does it mean we don't know if it happened naturally or not?
Well, so just returning to our definitions of natural and supernatural, if natural is what we currently have an understanding for, and that we currently have a model to describe, and that none of those things apply to the origin of the universe at this time, by, I guess, your definition, the origin of the universe is supernatural in the sense that it doesn't currently fit within our naturalistic models, right? But that's also, you know, there's the frame here of a God of the gaps argument here, where we say, because we don't know, anything is possible in that space. But I think that there we place the Occam's razor and say, well, you know, there are some things which are more plausible than others for answering this potential question.
So I think we're kind of running into the issue of the definitions again, and I'm not sure how to kind of escape that problem, because if we define the supernatural as those things that we don't yet know, then it just becomes very difficult to kind of assign probabilities here. I don't know how to kind of get around this issue.
It's better. Presumably, it's better to believe things that we have evidence for. Would you agree with that? Like, it would be better to have evidence and believe things on evidence than not. Would that be a fair question?
Well, we're talking about something where, regardless of which way we look at the problem, we don't have evidence for it. Like, if we say it's entirely natural. So that's the problem, because we're using the words differently. When I say something is entirely natural, I'm saying that, you know, whether it's Stephen Hawking's idea of everything coming out of nothing through some kind of I don't remember what he was using, like using an illustration, using the black hole as an illustration as to how time stops in the black hole or something like that. It's been about 30 years, I think, since I read his book, but. And then you have Steve Carroll, I believe his name is, with the multiverse hypothesis and a few other options. But all those are natural explanations, and whether any of those are correct or there's some other natural explanation that's correct, we don't know yet, but those are natural explanations, as opposed to the universe having been maybe pre-programmed by some external entity, like.
Well, let me say it this way. You know, if it was discovered that the universe was created by an omniscient, omnipresent, intelligent mind that was able to live and survive outside of space and time, that had infinite power and was able to create the universe at will, in ways that we can't fathom, but that was actually the reality that we're in, that would become natural. I mean, by the moment we are able to build a model that necessitates that being the case, and that model was demonstrated to be true, then the existence of God would become a scientific fact by definition. Science is the descriptions of the things that we have justifiable reasons to believe in, essentially, and we don't yet have a need for a God to be placed in this space. But if one was to be discovered there, then it would become part of science. Just as if ghosts were to be demonstrated to be genuinely real, science wouldn't work to hide that fact. It would build the concept of ghosts and the afterlife into our scientific models, because science is only looking to describe reality. It's not looking to dictate what that reality should be. And I think that in that sense, God, if it were to be proven to exist, would have to be accounted for like everything else.
Yeah, I don't really have a way to kind of respond to this, because I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I agree in a sense that, once we, if through some means we discovered that there's some kind of supernatural entity out there, and we demonstrated that it exists, then they become part of reality. But at the same time, there's this sort of differentiation between different versions of reality, at least in my mind, and the way we think about these things is sort of how we interact with everything else. All subsequent conversation is based on the probabilities we assign to certain things at this very beginning. And I'm not sure how to proceed if we don't have a clear boundary between a certain model of the natural that we can define. Maybe I should recommend something for you to read. And I think it's called something about methodological naturalism by Baudry, I believe his last name is. He's an atheist, and he's basically trying to develop a way to think about. Essentially, he's producing kind of a rebuttal to intelligent design proponents and creationists. And he's kind of working through some issues, and he uses a certain definition of the natural that is basically just kind of the way modern scientists envision reality. Let's just define that as natural, and anything else as supernatural, because otherwise we kind of move the goalposts around. So I don't know, like if it will help, or maybe if you took a look at his way of approaching it, it might make more sense.
Yeah, happy to take a look. The reading list is getting.
I'm sure I've got tons and tons of stuff to read. So.
I struggle. I'm dyslexic, so I find it very difficult to read it. It's quite energy consuming, and but in any case, I'll certainly give it a go. There are different areas, different directions we could take this conversation. One of them is that there's actually a Street Epistemology survey, which I think might be interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No.
I can send you a link to this, and we could look through this. It's basically a series of questions that kind of help frame somebody's relationship with reality, which sounds that's probably not a generous way of framing it as a thing, but it basically helps people, I think, articulate where there might be differences of opinion in like how we understand things. I could send that over, and we could take a look at that. Cool. Give me 1 second then, and I will pull this up. If you wanted to if you need to take a break for 2 minutes, I'm just going to pull this up and I'll send it over to you, and I can take a break in the video, and we can
it's up to you.
Skip past this moment.
Sure. It's up to you.
Yep, same. Awesome.
I clicked on reveal something, and then there's a bunch of numbers that came up. I'm not sure what they mean, but anyway.
Okay, cool. Let's jump into the screen share, and we will hopefully we'll see this. Again, this is the first time I've used this, so here we go. All right.
I see. So I see where we differ. That's probably the thing that this is.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So there's one hidden. I don't understand how we've got 3 people voting in this moment, but that's okay. I'm not sure. So
hold on.
Okay, a statement.
Put your cursor over. Who's willing? I'm sorry. Who's?
Oh, that's me.
No, that's you. Who's hidden? Yeah.
I don't know. That's the thing. That's maybe God's intervening.
There you go. There's your ghost in the machine.
Absolutely.
If you needed evidence,
they've signed into Google. Excellent. A statement is true when it corresponds to reality, so we both agree with that. That's cool. We all share the same reality and only interpret it differently. Both of us same. This is looking very similar across the board here. Truth depends on the opinions and beliefs of others. People create words and define their meaning. A statement is true if everybody agrees. Strong belief, even without action, can change external reality. We're just all exactly the same here. Some beliefs should never be questioned. Someone can be certain about something and yet still be mistaken. Okay, we should be satisfied that a test can only confirm our claim. I think you didn't answer that one.
I thought I did.
Oh, no problem. Where do you want to go?
Same with you. Why doesn't it come through? Maybe because I'm not sure. Maybe I missed it or something.
No problem. If all members of society share a belief, they're justified to hold that belief. Again, same. Believing something that feels false, believing something that is false feels like believing something that is true. So this is the first time we've slightly digressed, and it's only not much. The feelings are a reliable way to discover truth. So you strongly disagree with that, and I would be tempted to agree with you. The only reason I make a minor swerve here is because I think feelings are intuitions, and our intuitions are at least the first step in discovering truthing.
Yeah, I'm okay with
that. I would that's hardly a strong disagreement. Believing something without evidence is admirable. We're the same. Without an explanation for something, any answer is better than no answer. I slightly swerve here. You went strong disagree, and I was like one away from there. Again, this is kind of similar for me. Like, I feel like we do need to take action in the world without certainty. And so I would be remiss if I said that we had to have an answer before we could do something. It's okay to accept something is true because it's comforting. Same. I give all the claims and benefits the benefit of the doubt when I first encounter them. We both went into the middle there. That's remarkable. This is good. And what was your reasoning behind the middle there?
Because there's some things that are past the point of benefit of the doubt. I mean, like, I don't spend time arguing with flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and a bunch of other people that are just outside the realm of reasonability, or whatever you call it.
Spot on.
And I think the reason we disagree on 17 is for the same reasons we disagreed on 12 and the others, because I kind of did there what you did with those. Like I just said, someone is justified in their beliefs because they kind of need to believe something until they're proven wrong or something to that effect. I'm looking at number 17 where we're kind of off by one.
I see. Yeah. So someone is justified in their beliefs until they're proven wrong. So this is interesting because I can sort of see where you're coming from there, that, you know, it's okay for somebody to believe something until it's demonstrated to be false, but falsifiability is tricky. Like, you can't, so Bertrand Russell's teapot flying in space can't be falsified. And I don't think that they're necessarily justified in believing that position.
Like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, you meet somebody that lives somewhere out in the boonies who hasn't been exposed to modern thought and everything, and they have certain beliefs of reality because that's all they have, and they're living their lives, and that's what they could do. But if they have access to more information and they, you know, they have the chance to grow beyond that, they're no longer justified in holding those beliefs. But I think it's kind of the same justification that you had for number 12 and some.
I hear you. So I feel like you're interpreting that slightly different to me. If I'm right, you're interpreting that as, you know, you can't blame somebody for holding a certain belief until. Gotcha. And I'm just saying that belief, I wouldn't blame them either for having it, but I just would not believe that the belief was justified until they had a reason to believe it to be true.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Gotcha. The most important criteria for my beliefs is that they match reality. We're just exactly the same all the way here. I often investigate beliefs that don't match my own. I'm comfortable saying I don't know. It's beneficial to find out what I'm wrong about. I abandon my belief if I discover reliable information that falsifies it. The more unusual the statement, the stronger the evidence needs to be, and it's possible that some of my beliefs are not true. Well, I don't know if that was it. I didn't know what I was expecting, but that's remarkable that we were just so down the line on that. It's certainly encouraging, I would say.
We probably agree more than you would with some of your SE buddies.
Yes, that's possibly quite true, actually. I've argued the wording on some of these, but I think they've been working on it quite a bit, and it seems to have improved a fair amount. But yeah, do you think that survey is useful, just out of curiosity?
I think it's useful. I'm not sure how useful it is for our present predicament. But I think it's useful definitely because, in fact, like most of the Christians I know would probably have very different answers on the survey. So, but
Yeah.
I don't think you'll be able to convince them to change their perspective on them. So I'm not sure if it's useful in that sense. But
I got you. Yeah, well, this is also a challenge, but I think understanding where the differences are is the first step in being able to discuss why we feel that the differences are important, or what our reasons for those differences are. One thing I think that might be worth talking about maybe at this point, I mean, it's up to you, but I would be interested in exploring. It seems that you're clearly more inclined to believe in a supernatural explanation for the creation of the universe in the form of the Christian God. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes and no. Yes, but it's based on subsequent reasoning. But I guess what I've tried to do so far is to set up a baseline for all the subsequent rationale, and I don't see a way to really move past that point until we define certain probabilities, and then we assign weight to them, and we find a way to discuss that. But I mean, we can definitely move on to something else, but I think this will affect how we come to every other conclusion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one other question that I wanted to explore with you is like this idea of the supernatural. If the supernatural space can be roughly analogous to things that we don't yet have a reason to believe, right? But are all positions in that space equally valid? Like, I
don't think so. So if I'm understanding it correctly, I think there's probably an infinite number of perspectives on what reality could be. I mean, I could sit here and invent a religion in the next 5 minutes if I really wanted to.
right.
And not all of them are equal. I mean, like, we need to have certain standards of rationality that we subject every perspective to. It doesn't matter if it's a religion, a philosophy, or the lack of because essentially, even when you reject a point of view, you have to have some perspective of what reality is all about. So everybody has some kind of worldview, and I think they're all subject to scrutiny, but definitely some of them are more reasonable than others. And some of them are of such a nature that you cannot even test them, or you cannot even question them. There's no criteria on which to evaluate them because they don't fit within our modern approach to questions like this, to studying things, to the question of example.
No, absolutely. I think last time you mentioned last Thursdayism, which is unfalsifiable and totally viable, but where did we go with that? Not really anywhere. If there are multiple competing ideas that we have no evidence for, but some are more likely than others, what are we using to evaluate or equivocate between their relative likelihoods if it's not the evidence?
So I guess the step-by-step process that I follow is I start with this sort of foundational epistemology where I break everything down into these two hypotheses, the natural versus the non-natural, just to kind of avoid the supernatural term. But let's just say for a second that we assign equal probability to those two. Once we get to that second option, there's many possible versions of it, and there has to be some criteria by which we evaluate them, and it has many facets because, like, for example, if you introduce the idea of a God, then there's so many questions. Like, well, if a God exists, why doesn't this God reveal itself? Why doesn't it resolve some of the problems of the world? Or why is it that we can explain things through scientific processes as opposed to needing to rely on supernatural explanations? There's probably hundreds of maybe even thousands of questions that all worldviews have to have some explanation for, and they do. Like, if you go from religion to religion, world religions, or within Christianity, there's I don't know, I would say maybe 10, 20 different traditions. They each have kind of a universal explanation for stuff, and sometimes they get very complex. I mean, could spend the next 10 years reading materials on the, say, the Aristotelian perspective that's adopted within by Aquinas and others in Catholic Christianity, and then other versions of it, and all this stuff. I mean, it's endless. I've been reading so much stuff that my head is exploding from all the different perspectives out there that I've been trying to like wrap my mind around. But all of them are trying to make sense of reality and to explain all these different types of questions. How do they interact with science? How do they interact with other aspects of reality? And some of them do a better job than others. And I don't want to mention any names, but there are fairly popular religions out there that, epistemically speaking, are very weak because, like, fundamentally, it just boils down to some person claimed something was true and everybody believed them. And like I said, I could create a religion in the next 5 minutes if I wanted to. So it's not a big deal that somebody claimed something happened, like, you know, I had a vision or this and that. So, so there's definitely points of view that have a very weak epistemology, while others have a very complex epistemology. It doesn't mean it's sound or correct or viable, but still, like, there's there's plenty of models out there that, yeah.
I don't think you're making this argument, but just as just sort of reflecting a little bit on what you're saying, I've definitely heard Christian apologists in conversation where they are, you know, it's incredibly complex and layered, nuanced discussion about some component of theology, and whenever I hear it, I cannot help but feel like I'm listening to a bunch of friends of mine who will have exactly the same level of passionate discourse over the rule set of Dungeons and Dragons. Once you build a complex structure and you define some rules within that structure, then the emergence of complexity becomes almost inevitable, and differing opinions and nuances within those opinions start to become self-reinforcing. And then all of a sudden, you know, if we take this path and we've assumed these things, then now we have to square it with this idea that's a problem, and all of a sudden there's a sort of beautiful tree of entirely fictional worlds, certainly in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, that are sufficiently complex and nuanced and studied and storied and debated over, revised and argued about, and I think that's interesting. And I think for some people, I think this complexity of a belief is in some way some evidence of its verisimilitude, and I don't think it necessarily should be seen that way. And again, that's not to say it should be dismissed because it's complicated, but it certainly shouldn't, I think, add weight to the premise, unless it's, as you say, the epistemology needs to be sound, right? And without that, it's...
I agree. I mean, on both ends, I don't think the complexity or the lack of complexity is really an argument for it. Essentially, we evaluate things based on how they mesh with reality, with all the things we know about reality. And, is it a plausible way to think about reality given our entire human experience up to this point? And sometimes even, sometimes even practical applications, like what is the impact of this point of view on society over an extended period of time? Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? And of course, this isn't a definitive test, but it plays into this bigger structure of, you know, evaluating the model.
Mike, one thing that occurs to me is that we both seem to agree an awful lot about an awful lot of the fundamental things, and I think that's really interesting and charming. But we definitely have come to different conclusions about where our worldviews have led us. Why do you think where do you think I might have gone wrong?
So like I kind of started off with, I don't think the atheist is being irrational in being an atheist, but I also don't think that people that have several other models are being irrational. And some are, but not. So maybe out of the thousands of possible options out there, maybe there's a handful of options that are still reasonable to hold at this point in time. And the way I look at it, sorry, I'm getting a cough all of a sudden. But the way I think of it is similar to the way things work in science. given any unknown question, you could have different scientists come up with different models, and until they get to the point where sufficient data is gathered and sufficient experiments are done, and they're at a point to definitively say, no, this model works, this model doesn't, both models are in play. And different scientists are working on different approaches, and they might argue with each other, and they might even be fully convinced that their model is correct, but they know that it hasn't been fully settled yet. And up to maybe at some point in the future, we might have all the necessary data, but at this point in time, I think the different models are still in play, and people can be rational in holding those views.
So we would have to falsify all potential views that before they should be abandoned. Would that be?
It's not just falsification, although that helps. Like we've already mentioned, there's certain views that have been falsified, so we can dismiss them and say these are not reasonable positions to hold today. But it's also that all our alternatives are limited. Like there's, regardless of what worldview you hold, there's limitations to, or there's things that haven't yet been explained, things that are not fully fleshed out. And we can look at them and say which of the worldviews is superior, which one seems to make better sense of reality. And if, if I think, okay, this particular perspective is 60% likely, while this one is like 40% likely, then I'm not going to blame this person for still holding on to it, because that's still a good percentage to hold it based off of,
Well, I would say that given that we've got, if we were to be able to say that we don't yet have any reason to believe any one of them being true, and this is where we were, I think, at the end of the previous video, is there a reason to need to assume that any of them are true?
Well, something has to be true, because we
Sure.
got here somehow. Like we exist for, there's some way we're here. So.
I am certain that the number of things that I do not know that are true in the world vastly outweigh the number of things that I think I know. And in fact, most of the things that I think I know are probably not true. I think I'm probably wrong about most things. It's just that I don't yet have a reason to abandon those beliefs, and I don't yet realize why they're wrong. And the moment I do, I hope I will. But in any case, for me to adopt the Christian worldview, it would need to be something more than just a unfalsifiable claim, right? It would need to be something that I could genuinely feel is the better explanation for the observable phenomenon. So I guess one question might be, why do you feel it's a better explanation of the observable phenomenon?
I think it's a more comprehensive worldview, and maybe we kind of jumped over a step here, but like if I were to do a systematic presentation of my approach to epistemology, after I discuss those foundational elements that we've been talking about in the previous video and up to this point, the next step is this idea that when if we imagined the reality to be purely naturalistic, we're kind of limited in our epistemology because we build knowledge based on our senses and our reason. Like we study the world through our senses or through instruments that extend our ability to access those same elements. Like you have a telescope that can let you see further, or hear things that we couldn't hear before, things like that. And then with our reasoning, we tend to imagine possibilities and then evaluate their likelihoods. I sometimes use I use a lot of analogies for some reason. I don't know. It seems to me like
I like analogies. Yeah. Analogies help.
Yeah, I guess that's how I kind of figured out how to communicate over the years. But so one kind of story I use is that if you suppose that you were kidnapped one day, like you went out somewhere and all of a sudden you wake up, like maybe somebody drugged you and you woke up in this room, and it's this huge room with very thick concrete walls that has no windows, no doors, no cracks, nothing, right? And you have no idea why you're there, how you got there, what's going on, and there's nobody there to explain it to you. So naturally, you're gonna like try to figure out what's happening and try to get some information. But if you go and you start maybe looking around and you don't see any crack in the walls and you knock on them and you can break through the wall and you put your ear to the wall and you don't hear anything, like essentially your knowledge about any of that information, like where am I, why am I here, all that stuff, your knowledge is limited by your senses. You're basically stuck within the structure and you cannot access the outside world. But with your reasoning, you can maybe speculate and say, okay, maybe I'm being held here for ransom, or maybe this is some kind of science experiment, or maybe this is one of those TV shows where like rich people are trying to decide if I'm going to go crazy or whatever, and bet money on how I'm going to behave. Like you could come up with possible solutions, but they're just speculation. But they reduce the number of possibilities. Out of the infinite number of reasons for why you're there, you reduce it to a number of more probable options, So essentially your reason and your senses are what you have at your disposal to access knowledge. And in a situation like that, you're limited. And to the same degree, we're limited here. Basically, we're on this rock and we're floating through space, and we've been able to access things to some degree. We send out this new telescope now that allows us to see further than we have before, but still, that's only a small portion of what's out there. And with our reasoning, we can think about possible explanations for things like that, for why we're here and how things work, but we're kind of limited in that sense. And there's only so far we can go with what we have at our disposal in terms of our ability to access knowledge or understand reality. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that, okay, so in this room with no lights, no windows, no cracks in the doors, nothing, would it be reasonable to have a view? It could be in that moment either nighttime or daytime, right? But presumably, given your complete inability to access any information on that account, would it be a reasonable thing to do to assume that it was daytime?
I mean, not unless you had a sense of how long you've been out or something like that. You probably wouldn't be able to know that either.
So on the basis of the available evidence, right, it could either be daytime or nighttime, but you presently just have no reason to be able to make a decision. So somebody who says that they know that it's daytime, that happened to be in the same box with you and has had the same limited access, that would be a strange move for them to make, it would seem.
Yeah.
I think to me that's sort of how I think it feels to hear sort of the Christian worldview, because to me it seems like, whilst I could acknowledge it's a possible explanation, there's no reason that I can see, no evidence that can be provided that demonstrates to me why I should make that assumption about the reality. Where are you seeing the light that I can't see? Where are you getting this information from?
Yeah, so the question, like, is it daylight or night out there, is definitely that kind of a question that we'd probably just say, like, honestly, there's no way to know, and it doesn't even matter in our present predicament. But the question as to why we're here, that's something we could somewhat speculate on. Like, we could say, I think, maybe I made some enemies someplace, and maybe this is their way of punishing me for doing who knows what. So that at least gives me some expectation. I could be wrong, but at least that's a good probability for why I'm in that room, and maybe I can prepare myself for that being a possibility or something to that effect. So there are some things that we can speculate about, and in doing so, maybe reduce the possible options that we can conceive to some more reasonable alternatives. But
are we really reducing? Sorry.
Well, okay. Let me just say this extra thing. But even within this scenario, our from our point of view, looking out, we're limited in our epistemology. But if somebody took us, kidnapped us, and put us in there, they could always reveal to us whatever they want to reveal to us. So there is this extra element that is in play when somebody says, okay, there is such a thing as the supernatural. That isn't in play if we're in a naturalistic reality. In a naturalistic reality, it's just a question of what can we know from where we are looking out. But if there is such a thing as a supernatural, and the supernatural at least has some kind of consciousness or knowledge or whatever, and put us there intentionally, there is also the possibility of this entity reaching in or communicating with us or giving us some kind of information about the situation. So essentially what I'm saying is that the naturalistic epistemology has certain limitations, but once somebody allows for the supernatural, there is an extra possibility there in terms of accessing knowledge. Now, again, there's tons of problems with that as a possibility, but theoretically, there's an extra element there that wasn't there before, if we're saying the natural is all there is.
I mean, one problem with the supernatural hypothesis is if we assume, for example, that there are entities in the world that are able to have this power over us, and theoretically they could make us believe and think and feel whatever they chose to, or if it's just a singular entity, whatever it chose to. And therefore, what basis, where can we ever stand? You know, at that point, we are literally being dissuaded by Pascal's demon, or could never know that we weren't sufficient. But unlike presently, where we would say we have no reason to believe that there's a Pascal's demon interfering with us, or at least if it is the case, then it wouldn't matter to us in either case. If we're in the Matrix, we need to discover the rules of the Matrix, and if Pascal's demon is currently deluding us, then we need to understand the limits of that delusion. If there is a God that is essentially able to manipulate reality such that, you know, we can be made to believe or think or see or whatever, what is the reason we should assume that the world is intuitable? Like, what is the point of understanding anything? Because ultimately it could be changed. We wouldn't know. Like, it becomes almost an unhelpful hypothesis, right? Like, how do you navigate that space, right? If they can change the rules of the Matrix such that not only is the Matrix changing, but what you think you are changing as well, what's the point in trying to explore any of this? It seems all futile. I don't know if that's more of an argument from personal incredulity in my part, but in any case, I think it.
Yeah, no, that possibility is there. I mean, like, going back to the original analogy, like if somebody put you in the room, they let you, you know, spend a day or two there trying to break out, and eventually you realize you can't break out and you have no idea why you're there. Now, this person could maybe get on a speaker and say something like, hey, the reason you're here is XYZ. But they could be lying to you. They could be messing with you in that situation as well. Or they might be saying, like, no, you're here because you angered me about something. Or you could be here because this is a scientific experiment and this is what we're trying to figure out, or whatever. Like, you can believe or not believe the explanation. It could be a lie or it could be the truth. And unfortunately, that's just the reality. But yeah.
There's a Dave Allen joke. Dave Allen, an Irish comedian, about 70s, I think, in 1970s. He tells a joke about an atheist arguing with the Pope, and he said the atheist. So the Pope says to the atheist, he says, "The problem with you is you're a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that's just not there."
Hey,
and the atheist.
1 second, I think my computer battery is about to die. I thought I was plugged in here.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I was plugged in, but it's not working. I know.
Computer battery is killing my joke.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, okay. Hopefully, yeah, okay, we're back.
Excuse me.
The plug got broken in half. You know how there's that kind of middle section. It wasn't.
Oh wow, yeah.
It was plugged in, but it wasn't charging. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that. Okay, so the Pope, you're in a dark.
So the Pope says the Pope says to the atheist, "You the problem with you is that you're a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there." The atheist turns around to the Pope and says, you see, that's the odd, because I think we're the same. I think you also are a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that's not there. He says the difference is that you seem to think you found it. Mike, I think it's probably a good time to pull it to one side. But I definitely would like to try to explore, like in another video with you. Maybe we could talk about, if hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again, because I'm enjoying these conversations, and I definitely think there's more road here. But I definitely think we need to find a way of distinguishing between these different concepts of the supernatural that you're describing. I think that is a limitation. If we're just using the supernatural as a synonym for God, then I'm happy just to use God. But I think if the supernatural is something which we want to define as, I don't know, spiritual or sort of, extra natural in some way, rather than just be the sort of sphere of things that we don't yet know about things, then I think finding a way to define that would be useful. And then secondly, I think it would be, I do genuinely think, and I know that I've definitely noticed that you've not wanted to sort of bring arguments from religion and sort of specific arguments for a specific religion into the conversation. And I think I completely understand that approach. But I think it might be interesting to explore, I guess, why you feel this move is the right one. Because again, I really feel like there's so much, there's so much that we're on the same page with, and yet this one move seems to be quite a divergent path in our worldviews, right? This one space somewhere where you're feeling something is more a valid move than I do, and it would just be good to notice.
I was just thinking as we were talking that I'm trying to come up with a different approach to epistemology and the whole discussion, and I think one of the reasons why maybe I'm not as successful as I would have liked to be in doing this, because I've been kind of having these conversations for a while, is that my approach is very confusing and very complex. And it's so much easier to say, hey, prime mover, design argument, what is that, fix something?
Intelligent design?
No, I'm talking about the different arguments that people like William McCraig and something.
Oh, the teleological,
ontological, the something, fix something. Go ahead.
Did you? The
fine tuning argument. That's what I was trying to come up with. It's so much easier to just bring those up and be done with.
Fine tuning, yeah.
But yeah.
Do you find any of those arguments persuasive? Like personally,
like I said before, to me, the idea of a prime mover is simply that something started this whole thing. But the move from there to saying that this something has to be God seems kind of stretched to me. Like maybe there's something else that could have started this whole thing that wouldn't qualify as God. So that's why I have problems with the prime mover argument. The fine-tuning argument has some validity in my opinion, but it's kind of like one analogy I use with theists is to say, okay, imagine a glass sphere that is being held in space by some screws that are like maybe 4 screws that are positioned in such a way to hold it in space exactly where it needs to be, right? So one here, one on the side, and one in the back, one in the front, or whatever, like basically perfectly aligned to hold that sphere in space. If you tighten those screws, like if you take one screw and you tighten it more, the sphere is going to crack. If you loosen it a little bit, the thing is going to float out into space and it escapes its positioning. But if you unscrew a couple of these and tighten the other two, the sphere just moves over and it's still stuck in space, right? So with a fine-tuning argument, the idea is that basically there's a set of constants that are very precisely tuned. But we don't know if that's the only combination that works. Like there might be a completely different combination that is also could produce some kind of intelligent life that might be very different than what we have today. But maybe there could still be a reality, and we have no way to prove or disprove that idea. And then, of course, there's unlimited time and the multiverse hypothesis. So there's many ways to get around it, which kind of reduces the strength of that argument, in my opinion. So
there's also the implication that the screws are independent, which is not necessarily certainly the case. It could just be that these multiple screws are actually all various explanations from the all various expressions of the same underlying constant, right? These are just the way we currently model these constants. They are separate values, but actually maybe when we really truly have a unified theory of physics, then we will be able to say, actually, these are all derived from the same underlying property of the universe, right? So
that's also another possibility. So then there's the design argument, which kind of has diminished in strength over time. The moral argument, I don't think has any value.
The design argument that may have diminished, it's still potent for a lot of people, though. I mean, it's still, people feel intuitively that we are so complicated that they can't emotionally, I think, understand the how complexity can be derived from simple processes. And I feel like that's a very human level intuition. Like when we see something is complex, we'll assume that it's been made to be complex. One of the things that I found useful when talking about that is the idea of fractals. Have you seen fractal geometries? These are just really simplistic equations, essentially, that derive massive amounts of complexity and sophistication, just from a few simple little bits of maths. And so it may be counterintuitive, but functionally we can demonstrate that you can get massive complexity from very small amounts of data.
Yeah, so there's all these arguments. I mean, the ontological argument, I think, is worthless. I think it actually works against us in the sense that it makes everything sound so stupid that it's kind of like, why even bring it up? But
it is an odd one. Although it was one of Aquinas's.
That one was I can't think of his name. What was that? Saint Anselm or something like that. I'm not pronouncing it.
Yes, sorry, you're right. It wasn't Aquinas. You're right. Yeah.
And like I said, the moral argument, I think you could make a perfectly legitimate case for a naturalistic morality, and I don't think the moral argument works. But probably 99% of theists will disagree with me on that. Most people I've ever met disagree with me on the moral argument for sure.
Which is it's such a disquieting thought, actually. I find the moral argument to be one of the most unfortunate ones, really, because you just get a lot of probably quite nice people saying that without God they would be horrible rapists and murderers and alcoholics. You don't not hear from some preacher that the horrible life, they really do. They were really wild people, it turns out, before they found Jesus. It's always.
And that kind of, in fact, a lot of people that go into the ministry have this kind of an experience. So it's kind of like a hit rock bottom, and then cry out to God, and then everything changes, and that becomes
that's evidence for that. Yeah. I have some interesting theories on morality. It might be fun to explore with you at some point, but that's very tangential too.
I think a lot of these things can be explained actually by just studying philosophy. Like if you take the time to go through Plato and Aristotle and some of the moves that happen later throughout the Christian, because Christianity is really like a footnote on Plato and Aristotle. Like if you look at Christian history, you have people like Augustine that basically just build on Plato and Plotinus and a few others. And you have people like Aquinas that build on Aristotle. And like a lot of the reasoning processes are just essentially just coming down to us from the Greeks. So a lot of the ways that apologists think are because of the assumptions that they make that go all the way back to the assumptions that the Greeks were making. And there's some interesting moves there that I don't think are really valid in today's world. Like I think if Plato and Aristotle lived today, they would, like if they were resurrected and had a chance to see what we know today, they will rethink their whole philosophy. But for whatever reason, Christians are sort of stuck in that world because that's how their philosophy developed. So
couldn't agree more. And once again, we're in violent agreement about all of these things, which makes it even more curious that we're presently in such significantly different places on this issue, and yeah, I can't quite find this place where the paths have diverged. I basically, I think the simplest way for me to explain it, and I don't want to go any further with this, but it's just that again, I think like there's different models of reality, and I think they're all weak. So in a sense, you're just choosing between
several possibilities that are like not credible, regardless of which way you take. I mean, they're just limited. So you got to work with what you have. And, yeah.
But then my argument would be, do you have to make a choice, right? Like, you can make an argument that you need to decide whether you're going to act in line with a particular religious view on the basis that you might fear the consequences of that religion being true, and therefore the implications to your immortal soul, etc. And that's a sort of Pascal's wager sort of move.
I don't think that's a valid argument.
I don't think it's a valid argument, but I do think it's emotionally persuasive to some people, and I think that I think the reality is that you kind of need to believe it a little bit, or enough to take it as a serious, credible threat, and then you would be motivated to support the whole move, if you will. But in any case, I think without that kind of concern, is there any need to believe any of this? I mean, I'm more than happy to say, for example, on the question of whether there is, the origin of creation and life and the Big Bang, that I don't know, and I don't think anybody else does either. Like, I'm just fine with that, because it really, tomorrow I'm going to make coffee and play some video games and do some work, and and that's fine. Like, I don't think the absence of this answer is sufficiently damaging to me or concerning to me. And in any case, we're so close. We're so much closer now than we ever have been throughout history, which means every other human being on this planet that's ever lived has had to suffer from being further away from that answer, and I'm sure haven't necessarily suffered all that much. So it's fascinating that we're getting these better models and that we're building this better understanding, but it's not going to change how much I enjoy my coffee, tomorrow. And that's just the way I feel. Mike, it's always a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. I'm happy to do it again. I think we could just frame like how we might want to have a subsequent conversation and sort of where we might want to pick this up. But it's been really good. And again, I feel like we're just agreeing almost all the way down the line here. And our answers to the SE survey were kind of very, very nicely exemplifying that. So yeah, I think it's still interesting talking to you. But I would definitely be up for talking about it again. And we just need to, I guess, find a path for that next conversation.
I'm going to go back and listen to this conversation and maybe do another commentary or two. Hopefully I'll have more time to do it, because I was a bit rushed the last time. But after that, I guess we can decide where to go next.
Yeah, that sounds good. In any case, I'm always happy to talk. You're definitely a fantastic conversation partner, so I really enjoy that, and I really appreciate that. So, Mike, thanks ever so much for your time, mate. Have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon, hopefully.
Take care. Thanks.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye.